Trump dying or something? I mean, the Obamas at the DNC and the Washington Post unexpectedly fully imploding, and Trump confirming he is ready to bribe RFK in order to get him to drop out and endorse him. And did you hear Trump yesterday? Did you hear him talk? He's in Howell, Michigan, where it might as well be Alabama in the year 1855, where they marched chanting, "We love Hitler, we love Trump," a month ago, and he came out at the county sheriff's office, and behind him with the cops as the props, and in front of him the local fascists all named Jan and Irv with an E. And if he had had 10 times the energy and 10 times the focus he actually had, you would have said, "What's wrong with Trump? Is he dying or something?"
Very, very much appreciate it. Nice place, by the way. Incredible people outside. You said the crowds. It's incredible. And we really feel good about the state and the area. We're doing very well here. Just got a poll that was very good. A lot of good polls the last couple of days. Thank you to the Livingston County Sheriff's Department for welcoming us in such a beautiful way.
Get a roll of stamps and mail it in, pal. Quarter century ago, my ex-brother-in-law went sudden onset bipolar. No previous diagnosis, then the full thing all at once. He decided he was a freeway cop in L.A. He was actually a minister. He started pulling other drivers over, and this was when freeway shootings were the rage in L.A., and he spent twice his annual salary in travel bookings for Christmas, and they hospitalized him and medicated him, and he was already in there 3 days, and he still had not slept. He still hadn't fully left the high end of the spectrum, and he phoned me and pretended he was not in the hospital, and he pretended he had not gone sleepless for 72 hours, and he pretended everything was just fine, and he sounded like he had been gargling with battery acid. And he sounded better in that phone call than Trump sounded yesterday in Ku Klux Klan City, Michigan.
You know, interestingly, like New York, when I left for Washington, New York, we had a very bad mayor, de Blasio, but he wasn't there that long, and he couldn't ruin what took place. But we had a city that was so wonderful and so thriving, and just in a few short years, that changed. New York State is doing terribly. I heard the governor last night speaking so viciously and violently about me, but she doesn't speak about what they've done to destroy the state. The law enforcement has been decimated. The judges, what's gone on with the judges in New York? There's no justice. They just have it out for the police. Nobody knows why. I don't understand why. From a common sense, I like to say the Republican Party is now the party of common sense. Conservative, yeah, I guess conservative. It doesn't matter. It's the party of common sense. We want to have borders. We want to have strong police protection. We want a military that can protect us. We want great
Look,
schools.
Don, if you need a nap, just curl up on the floor. It's better than this sleepwalking stuff. Holy cow. By the way, Trump spokes bubblehead Caroline Leavitt explained that this new Trump, that one, inaudible J. Trump, he is presenting a message of optimism to contrast what the Democrats are doing at their convention. Look, we can argue policy all you want, Ms. Leavitt, but one thing the Democrats are doing at their convention is remaining audible and intelligible to people who are standing more than 5 feet away. Have you ever heard Trump like this? My God, I mean, I don't think he's dying. I think there are intermediate stages between having every single thing in your presidential campaign turn against you in a matter of 13 days, 2 weeks, and actually dying. But look, if this mumbling stuff continues at this rate, they're going to have to start putting live captions over him. Shaking off his somnambulance for a second, Trump did respond to the overture from the RFK Jr. camp about dropping out if Trump would give him a role in his cabinet. I didn't know he was thinking about getting out, Trump said, but if he is thinking about getting out, certainly I'd be open to it. I would accuse Trump of lying about this. Every poll for a month has been unmistakably clear. Kennedy's support has been cut by half, and that half went to Kamala Harris, and what's left is almost entirely coming at Trump's expense. And there had been talk about this last week. But maybe Trump didn't know Kennedy was thinking about it, because getting back to my original question, is Trump dying or something? Of course, it's not Kennedy who's thinking about doing any of this. He's too busy knifing bear cubs on the parkways around Fun City here or something. It's this idiot Nicole Shanahan, whom he named his, quote, running mate, unquote, because she was willing to basically finance 90% of their nut job campaign, and because every single conspiracy theory he does not believe in, she does. And even Shanahan has figured this out, telling a podcast called Impact Theory that there's a choice between continuing, in which case, quote, we run the risk of a Kamala Harris and Walz presidency as we draw votes for Trump. We draw somehow more votes from Trump, or we walk away right now and join forces with Donald Trump. Translation, bribe us and we will go away and endorse you. Based on Shanahan's comments, again, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is somewhere insisting that, I don't know, dangerous Wi-Fi signals caused Putin to go into Ukraine or something. What they apparently want for dropping out is Secretary of Health and Human Services. For him, Kennedy, or for somebody they approve. And as terrifying as that thought is, I can answer only Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. Whatever deal Shanahan brokers with Trump, and she says she has been in contact with that campaign and it's going well, she better do it damned fast. A friend of Kennedy's has reportedly delivered boxes to election officials in Arizona, boxes containing 110,000 ballot signatures. Only they had been gathered by a super PAC supporting Kennedy, and such coordination between the actual Kennedy campaign and a super PAC supporting Kennedy is wildly illegal. On the other hand, at this point, what other option does Kennedy have? The New York Times reports that the campaign itself gathered 9,000 signatures in Arizona. The number to get on the ballot in Arizona is 42,000. So they better act quickly with Trump, or they might have nothing to withdraw from and thus nothing to negotiate with. On the other hand, I hope somebody from the Kennedy campaign has also reached out directly to J.V. Vance because, you know, is Trump dying or something? Now to the self-defenestration of the Washington Post and the New York Times and Politico and CNN and all the other news organizations that have disconnected their political coverage from reality and insulated their decision makers from the fact that they are burning themselves to the ground. And we'll skip for a moment the idea that suddenly where the leaked campaign memos came from matters, when 8 years ago, when they were Clinton campaign memos, it didn't matter. Oh, we can't touch it. It's from Iran. The Times really did this yesterday. Really did this. I thought I was reading The Onion. They did it with no sense of irony. No kind of meta self-reflection that would make you go, all right, I'll stick around for another day or two before I cancel my subscription for the third time this year. They actually printed this. You ready? Kamala Harris's tan suit was a surprising choice, our fashion critic writes. Holy effing Christ. And they did it just as Maureen Dowd did it on Sunday. The Dems are delighted, but a coup is still a coup. That headline came exactly 29 days after Maureen Dowd wrote, Lord Almighty Joe, let it go. And there's no meta there either. There's no second paragraph in which Dowd writes a paragraph owning up to her own mental faculties and their decline and her own fitness for office or her own age. The Post really did it yesterday and very late Monday as well, fact-checking Biden's speech and other elements of the Democratic National Convention first night, only it wasn't about getting the facts right. It was as if there was somebody from the Trump campaign standing over fact-checker Glenn Kessler's shoulder saying, if you get this wrong and we win, we put you in jail. Or worse, we make sure you never get a dinner reservation in this town again. More on the thing with fact-checking and the Post in a moment, but first, Politico did it again, too, with their newsletters that at the present rate of deterioration will be by September 1st or so, 40% news and 60% lists of birthdays, who showed up to what book party, new kids, sightings of Tammy Haddad, and other realizations of what used to be the self-policing joke of all political reporters, that the White House Correspondents' Dinner was the Oscars for ugly people, that joke. Only now, these same reporters who used to make that joke, they think the Oscars is the White House Correspondents' Dinner for unimportant people. I was thinking that the Times, the Post, CNN, Politico, Axios, and lots of others have become utterly self-referential and designed only to be read by the Times, Post, CNN, Politico, and Axios, when Meredith Shiner published a piece yesterday in the New Republic that makes this point beautifully. If I may, the headline, "Beware the pundit-brained version of the Democratic Convention." Yep. The subheadline, as everyday Americans tune in to watch Kamala Harris receive her party's nomination, they should trust what they see with their own eyes, especially as D.C.'s chattering class tries to gaslight them. I have to read some of what she wrote. It was as if she mined my own mind for this information and then wrote it better than I could. Quote, "As this class of political elites descends on Chicago this week for the Democratic National Convention, the average consumer of news needs to know they are not really coming here to workshop policy, interpret or execute progressive politics, or even discuss electoral strategy. They're coming to attend corporate-sponsored happy hours, eat free meals together at the CNN grill, and maybe, if they're really lucky, snag a selfie with John Legend. And now, more than ever, we should ask who all of this punditry, this hobnobbing, this navel-gazing is really for." To continue, because if this summer has revealed anything, it's that just like the Scott Walkers of yore, we are watching the national media short circuit before our very eyes. They are insular, they are unprepared, and after years of watching Morning Joe and searching for their birthdays in the Politico playbook, I feel so seen. After years of watching Morning Joe and searching for their birthdays in the Politico playbook, they do not see their role as speaking to us, but rather speaking to themselves. While this may seem ancillary to the main plot line of our national politics, the mainstream media own golding themselves out of civic relevance is a net negative for anyone who believes in the outcome of better, more representative good government. Of course, she continues, the Beltway media are conservative. This is not a novel argument by any means. It's an industry run by increasingly reactionary plutocrats who reliably summon their charges to lead a highly effective, but how will you pay for it, pincer movement against anything resembling liberal policy. Meanwhile, there is seemingly no sin grievous enough to earn a Republican the same sort of nullifying skepticism. The Trumpists who aided and abetted the former president's attempt to overturn a lawful election remain in the good graces of America's cable news bookers. Oh my God, I love this. Can we make it into a series? Still, we need to acknowledge that the media are conservative in the most traditional, unideological sense of the word. They are clinging to a status quo, their status quo, that has not matched our reality since Barack Obama was elected president in 2008 and the Tea Party emerged as the energized manifestation of Ronald Reagan's 1980s fever dreams. Their rules, their conventional wisdom, their savvy takes become more stale, more detached from normal life, and more cartoonish with every passing day. End quote. Begin applause. Tempting as it is, I have not read Ms. Shiner's piece in the New Republic aloud in its entirety. I encourage you to do so and to do so on their website. And I don't know, buy something from their advertisers. I will note, I have been hitting this one point for at least 10 years now, that the political cognoscenti have not covered Trump nor any of the consequences of his raping and pillaging of America because they still haven't figured out which reportorial template fits all of this or which news cubbyhole they can stuff the whole thing into. Chuck Todd, Chris Cillizza, Maggie Haberman, and Ryan Lizza don't actually exist. They are just mediocre people doing bad impressions of David Brinkley, Tom Wicker, Tim Russert, Woodward and Bernstein. They read what was written or said before and they think only, how can I now write that again? It had not happened by the time Ms. Shiner wrote her masterpiece, but speaking of Woodward, the Washington Post actually had to be pressured into fact-checking its timid, terrified fact-checking of the first night of the convention. The Post still will not fix its assertion, claiming Trump wanted Americans to inject bleach to fight COVID was, quote, exaggerated. It still says, because Trump later contradicted himself, that he didn't really mean it when he said that women who had abortions had to be punished in some way, when he said it on videotape. The Post will not correct its inaccurate criticism of Joe Biden for saying Trump answered the Charlottesville white supremacist attack by saying there are very fine people on both sides. But the Post insisted that there was no evidence that Trump ever sent love letters to dictators, with Mr. Kessler writing, "We do not know what Trump wrote to Kim Jong-un." Folks at Media Matters went appropriately nuts. Of course we know what Trump wrote to Kim Jong-un. Trump showed those letters to Bob Woodward of The Washington Post. The Washington Post fact check now has its own fact check about The Washington Post. Quote, parts of the letters were revealed in a 2020 book by Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward after Trump permitted him to read the letters into his tape recorder at the White House. This article has been corrected. The problem is that's it for the corrections. The Times, Post, Politico et al. Are still reporting, as Ms. Shiner noted, for each other. I was flashed back to a day 35 years ago when I was the sports director of the CBS television station in Los Angeles, and our network got the baseball contract. This is when people still wanted to watch baseball on television. I was nominated to be the host of the pregame show for the new CBS Game of the Week, a role I would later fill at NBC and Fox and Turner. The same job at 4 networks would have been pretty good, you have to admit that. But the guy making the call on this at CBS in 1989 was some dolt named Rick LaCivita. LaCivita, there's a coincidence. And he and Brent Musburger interviewed me one Sunday morning because Brent was supposed to be the CBS baseball play-by-play man, but he did not know CBS was about to fire him the week before the season began. Anyway, LaCivita, who, if I remember correctly, had been a second baseman at Harvard, rather listlessly asked me whose point of view CBS baseball should take. The batter, important but myopic, ultimately an irrelevancy. The pitcher, the truly uninvolved non-athlete. Or perhaps the second baseman at the center of all the action, captain of the defense, linchpin in any play. And I said, I think we should take the point of view of the fan. Lasavita looked at me in the eyes for the only time he would do so during the interview, and he said, with genuine surprise, "The point of view of the fan? What's that? And why on earth does that matter?" Bluntly, right now, our political media is this CBS sports guy, Rick Lasavita. Couple poll notes. The UVA Center for Politics, this is the Larry Sabato operation, has for the first time this cycle moved a state from leans Republican to toss up. The state is North Carolina. This is in line with polling that suggests she has closed the gap on Trump and continues to improve there. Virginia, Roanoke College polling, a little old, closed last Friday. Harris 47, Trump 44 in Virginia. Swing states, focal data polling for Semaphore News, also a little old. It closed last Friday. Trump by 2 in Arizona and 4 in Georgia. They are tied in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Harris by 4 in Wisconsin. Harris by 6 in Michigan. Harris by 8 in Nevada. The Electoral College map based on the Siena polls, Harris 313, Trump 225. Ipsos ABC on favorables. Get a load of this. Harris, favorable opinion, 47%. Unfavorable opinion, 47%. Less than most others, but still positive. But this is remarkable. Trump, favorable opinion, 36%. Unfavorable, 60%. That's negative 24. No wonder he's ming. I'm not saying he's dying. I'm just saying, is he dying? I mean, sounds like he's whatever. Anyway, also of interest here, the right-wing response to all of this. It's almost unbelievable, but they have gone back to blaming it all on the mastermind behind the scenes, pulling the strings, a foreigner manipulating America and laying plans to continue to manipulate America for the next quarter of a century. And that foreigner's name is Barack Obama? Birtherism reborn. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, I walked past the bar yesterday on a beautiful day in New York. It was 43 years ago, like last month, when a bunch of us wasted an entire day trying to find the owner of the New York Yankees in hopes that for some reason he would give us some vital information. We never found him. After I gave up, I went home, I got a pizza, I walked past this bar down the street from my house, and who steps out the side door but the owner of the New York Yankees? And that's not even the most amazing part. Ahead in things I promised not to tell. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, Eraserhead himself, Jesse Waters of Fox News. This is what he said yesterday. There's a weird vibe going on. I can't figure it out. Well, he could have stopped there and it could have summarized his entire career, but he went on. There's a weird vibe going on. I can't figure it out. Barack Obama is still the godfather of this machine. He gave us Joe Biden as VP. He gave us Hillary as Secretary of State. Then he cooed Joe, put all his boys with Kamala's team, and he had his wingman holder vet Waltz. I don't know who Waltz is. I presume he means Governor Walz, the vice presidential nominee. They've given up trying to mispronounce Kamala Harris's name, and now they've moved on to mispronouncing Walz's name. Now, the guy's a young 63. He's going to be doing this the next 25 years. He's definitely going to interfere with this election. By that, Waters means Obama plans to vote. Interfere. This is why we will be sending Johnny to Hawaii to get the truth about the birth certificate. This time we will dig deep and find out what really happened. Yeah, okay. Number one, Fox just re-embraced birtherism, if you missed it. Number two, Waters just confessed the greatest fear at Fox, the ongoing obsession, now in its, 17th year. This idiot Waters, speaking of 17 years, he's only 17 years younger than is Barack Obama. They really think that they will be living in a world manipulated by Barack Obama until the year 2049. To which I say, good. Have a great time, moron. Number three, this Johnny that Eraserhead Jesse is sending to Hawaii. Johnny is a houseplant. Then again, so is Jesse Waters. The runner-up, worser, Amy Kramer, Georgia Republican committee woman, former Tea Partier and January 6th speaker. You know this not too bright, possibly brain-damaged right-wing troll Jack Posobiec, who's been thrown off everything. He went to the Democratic National Convention and decided to interview protesters in hopes of getting them to, say that they were being paid by Mao Zedong, or I don't know, say that they have the real birth certificate for Barack Obama. Who knows? They just assume that what they would do, how they would try to cheat, break the law, do immoral things. They just assume the Democrats and the liberals have done that because the Democrats and the liberals have succeeded and they've failed, so they must just be doing more of it. That's the way they think, when they think. This Posobiec, of course, promptly got a hold of two women who turned out to be Democrats who showed up there deliberately to F with Jack Posobiec, to mess with his interviews. This didn't fool a lot of people. There is evidence that Jack Posobiec has realized now that the two women that he interviewed first at the Democratic National Committee protests were, in fact, people there looking for him. Posobiec disguised himself by wearing a facial covering, and everybody went and said, oh, he looks even dumber wearing facial clothing. In any event, Amy Kramer, Georgia Republican committee woman who wore some sort of leopard print mink to the January 6th insurrection and spoke nonsense and gibberish, played a clip of Jack Posobiec interviewing these two women who were effing with him. And she didn't realize it. And she wrote, a woman admits she's going to have an abortion on stage at the DNC. Everyone thought Laura Loomer was crazy when she said it was going to happen. Laura was right. This is sick. In no world is this okay. This woman needs counseling and mental treatment. Number one, Laura Loomer now claims that when she said that there was going to be a live abortion on stage at the Democratic National Committee, that she was being satirical. Republicans, by definition, can't be satirical because they would have to have an advanced sense of humor. And the only thing that Republicans laugh at, usually, is pointing at somebody who's injured themselves, or perhaps the video from The Simpsons, man hit in groin by football. But this woman, Kramer, part of the January 6th Trump event, thought this was legit, that the woman was going to have an on-stage abortion. The woman added, and her name was Anarchy Princess with the handle Satire AP, I'm also having a vasectomy on stage. I forgot to mention that. This did not deter Amy Kramer in the slightest. Who is Satire AP? who was interviewed by Jack Posobiec and said she was going to have an on-stage abortion and then added and a vasectomy? Satire AP, Anarchy Princess is no other person than the woman who keeps appearing at all of the Peter Navarro events, at his sentencing, at his hearings, the woman who's interrupting him and holding up placards and saying you're going to jail. And this boneheaded insurrectionist Republican still cannot process that this was a stunt designed to embarrass Posobiec and anybody who would take something this stupid seriously. People like Amy Kramer, Republican committee woman from Georgia. This is thick. In no world is this okay. This was a Tea Party organizer. I told you about the Tea Party when they started. We had to stop them then. This is what they've morphed into. Once again, more proof of my theory that our attempts to preserve democracy do not succeed as much as do their efforts and the stupidity of those who want to destroy democracy. They inadvertently protect it. Still, none of these are our winner. Our winner, Stephen L. Miller, formerly of the National Review Online, formerly of Fox News. He's been fired from a lot of places. Apparently, he does a podcast now. Nothing against podcasts, but I looked at the name here, and apparently nobody listens to it. You will have seen from Monday night at the DNC that Mallory McMorrow, the Michigan State Senator, not only got up and gave an excellent address, she brought props. She brought a giant, 5 times normal size book about Project 2025 and held it up so everybody could see it and could identify what everybody from Project 2025 is insisting is their intimate connection with the Trump plans for his next presidency. God help us if there is anything resembling one. But the prop was a giant, as I say, book that reads 2025 Mandate for Leadership. Stephen L. Miller writes, when it's Friday class, and this is over a picture of Mallory McMorrow, when it's Friday class and you think the substitute teacher might be cool and she turns out to be a massive, and then there's a 4-letter word that begins with C. He actually did this. Stephen L. Miller calling somebody else that. Stephen L. Miller. She turns out to be a massive C word. Hey, Stephen, do you have a mirror? Because in a remarkable coincidence, you too are a massive conqueror in today's competition for worst person in the world. Now from the files of things I promised not to tell, and I recently went past the building, my second professional home, and I was flooded with my memories of a place called the RKO Radio Network. This is 1980, and I'm nearing my 22nd birthday, and I'm working real hard at one radio network run by the United Press International Wire Service in my second year and making around, nearly $20,000 a year. And in September, a drunken manager had tried to get me fired, tried to fire me himself for being young. And I'll be damned if I can remember getting consecutive days off there. This was UPI in a nutshell. For my first few weeks there, I thought whoever had decorated the newsroom had found the floor tiles with the ugliest design pattern in history. And then finally, I saw a colleague grind his lit cigarette into that floor, and only then did I realize that was what the ugly design pattern was. Hundreds of ground out cigarettes. Years and years of ground out cigarettes in the tiles. Anyway, the main advantage to working at UPI was that everybody in what was then a flourishing radio business knew UPI, and thus they knew you, and they knew you were underpaid. The top all-news radio station in the country, WCBS in New York, had already asked if I might be a candidate for a coming opening in their sports department. The previous spring, I'd actually interviewed with 2 vice presidents at this thing the yachtsman Ted Turner, who owned the Atlanta Braves, was going to try to start, something he called Cable News Network. But they were not initially interested in me, and after meeting with them, I was certain they would never get it launched, let alone get an audience for it. I was working there literally 14 months later. I'd also been flown to Boston. Like they spent $55 on me by a radio station that really wanted me to do a morning sports shift for them, and they were offering $40,000 a year, twice my salary, and I was ready to do it, and I was sitting in the office in Boston trying to figure out where I could live and how late I could sleep and still get there in the morning. And then the news director said, "Now, except if there's a big story, you can do the afternoon sportscast from home over the phone," which is when I realized I was supposed to do the morning and the afternoon. I was essentially on the clock from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m., and the $40,000 would have had to go to my sister because the schedule would have killed me within 3 months. And then there was this RKO radio network. UPI was in the unique position of having RKO as a client. So RKO heard and used our stuff all the time. And also, they had from their beginning used our UPI feed as a kind of 24/7, constantly flowing, turned-on spigot audition service. From the time I got to UPI in July 1979, it seemed like one radio person from UPI per month was hired away by RKO. Sometime in the early autumn of 1980, I was covering a New York Rangers game at Madison Square Garden, and the guy next to me smoking a cigar inside the garden, right in front of all the fans, turned out to be the sports director of this RKO network. In fact, he was the entirety of the RKO sports department. "But we're doubling in size. I'm going to start doing weekend sportscasts, and I get to hire a new person to do the weekends. It's a union shop, so it's $51 a sportscast after. There's 10 a weekend, so you get 22 for any dollars reports from the field, and you'd be my backup. $22 from the field. And a guarantee of 5-10 a weekend. And you got to come in one day a week to book the stringers for the weekend games. That'd be free. But the guarantee is $26,000 plus those $22 every time you file a report from the field. You interested?" Well, I did some quick math. This was about 40% more money for about 40% less work. And there were no 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. schedules. When the sports director called me back a few weeks later to offer me the gig, I did not hesitate. His name, by the way, was Charlie Steiner. Charlie would later be a colleague of mine at SportsCenter, and then he did the Yankees games, and now he does the Dodgers games, and he's been a friend for 42 years. The network itself was also space-age shiny and new, and it had carpets. Whereas UPI had the stubbed-out cigarettes decor, RKO was literally the first radio network in this country to deliver all of its programs to its stations via satellite. No more scratchy, hyper-expensive phone lines. RKO came through crystal clear, and that was our pitch to the stations. All the newscasts, all the sportscasts, all the features ended with the same tagline. Via satellite, this is the RKO radio network. And then a spot for Hubba Bubba Gum. For my first few weeks there, part of the job also included doing 2 sportscasts a day for RKO's local station, WOR. The first time I went up in the elevator to their studio, it dawned on me that it was the exact same studio where 7 years before, I had been invited by the great comedians Bob Elliott and Ray Goulding, along with my dad, to sit and watch in amazed appreciation as Bob and Ray did their show on WOR. So basically, as of December 1980, I had accomplished all of my childhood goals. The only problem with the place was the location. RKO was on the southeast corner of Times Square, probably the low watermark in the history of Times Square. It was in 1440 Broadway at the corner of 40th Street. There was a back door at 41st Street and 6th Avenue, right across from Bryant Park. On those occasions, when I filled in for Charlie Steiner on the weekdays for his morning show, which they would tape overnight, I would often be at the studios until 2 or 3 a.m., and my walk home was a little sketchy. In point of fact, I would not walk home. I would run. I mean run from that back door at 41st and 6th. I'd pass Bryant Park on my right as fast as I could, past all the drug dealers and other folks, then dart on the north side of 42nd between 6th and 5th. And once you got to that corner of 5th and 42nd, you were back in civilization with good street lights and other people on the streets, no matter how late the hour, or as we called them in New York then, witnesses. Occasionally, I might have to walk in Times Square itself, usually when it was daylight. What surrounded me there was about as far from today's Disneyland East Times Square as you could imagine. In fact, you could not imagine. There were porn theaters everywhere. And it wasn't just porn theaters. They were spaced apart. And in between them, other businesses existed. Porn peep shows, porn sex shops, and porn video rental stores. I remember always making sure I was walking on the outside edge of the street, nearest the gutter, on the premise that in the event somebody tried to mug me, I stood a much better chance by running right out into automobile traffic. Besides which, I used to worry that if I walked too close to the porn theaters and the shows and the shops and the video stores, one day I might just get stuck to the sidewalk. Times Square was so different in 1980 and 1981 that I really can't imagine that the annual income made there from anything but porn and the RKO radio network was more than $20 a year in total. There was nothing else. I mean, nothing. On weekends, walking over from my home on the east side, I would decide which fast food place I'd be getting lunch from. Somewhere on Fifth Avenue or Lex, I'd go to the nearest payphone, I'd call the RKO newsroom desk, and I would offer to bring in food for everybody, for the simple reason that in Times Square, 40 years ago, there were no restaurants open on weekends. I'll say that again. In Times Square, 40 years ago, on the weekends, all the restaurants that existed there were closed during the day. And forget public transportation to Times Square. I would finish my brisk 25-minute walk to work one night in that frigid winter of 1980-81 and see my colleagues looking unusually pasty and drawn. "You didn't take the subway in, did you?" asked one of the editors, Tom Ryan. I looked at him like it was crazy. "Well, good. Some guy got stabbed by the stairs closest to our building." I asked if he was okay. "No, he's not okay. He's dead. But they got the guys who did it. They arrested 51 people. One guy got stabbed to death. 51 people were arrested. I asked if they had been restaging a reenactment of the assassination of Julius Caesar. Still, the equipment was brand new and easy to use, and the staff was all young. We all had fun, and we had parties, and everybody lived in the city, and for the most part, it was a pleasure to work there. And it was way more lucrative even than Charlie Steiner had suggested. Those $22 voice reports from the field, they piled up fast. The baseball players went on strike that June 1981, and every time I covered a bargaining session, I could be certain of at least another $44, and if that doesn't sound like much, the rent on my very nice studio apartment never got higher than $498 a month. RKO's location also provided me with some wacky logistical problems. I filled in for Charlie on most holidays, plus I did the same thing at a local radio station, WNEW. This made the actual Christmas into my metaphorical Christmas. If I had to fill in for both of these operations on the same day, my schedule went like this. Get into RKO in Times Square at maybe 2 a.m. Tape Charlie's morning show by 4 a.m., then walk across town very quickly to WNEW over on 3rd Avenue and do those sportscasts live between 5:30 and 9 and then go home and maybe take a nap, but not a long one because I would have to be back at RKO by 1 p.m. to do Charlie's afternoon show. Rinse, repeat. A lot of work. On the other hand, just 1 week of those days paid the rent for 2 months. On a wet New Year's Eve 1981, I treated myself to a cab to go to RKO, which put me in the bizarre position of getting into a cab on the east side at 1:30 a.m. New Year's morning and saying, "Take me to Times Square." And the driver saying, "You missed it, buddy. It's been 1982 for an hour and a half." Nothing like being the only person going into Times Square while 1 million people are leaving it. Drunk. Most of the sportscasts I did at RKO were pretty textbook. But there did come the day that I walked in to fill in for Charlie, who was at Wimbledon, so this is the summer of 1981, and the news wires were full of this story of some unnamed American radio reporter getting into a brawl with a London tabloid writer at a Wimbledon press conference, and it slowly evolved that the reporter was Charlie, my boss, and we were going to have to figure out a way to cover this. At first, Charlie wanted to do it in the third person and say, the reporter did this and the reporter said that. And I said, I really don't think we're going to get away with that. Given how much wire copy I'm seeing here, Charlie, this is probably going to be on the front page of the New York Times in the morning. Sure enough, it was. Above the fold. Worse still, unbeknownst to Charlie, his fight took place in a corner of the Wimbledon press room, right under the camera that fed out a shot of that room 24/7 to every television network in the world. Sure enough, the last item on ABC's 6:30 newscast that night with Peter Jennings was a feature on Charlie Steiner fighting with the British over how they broke up the John McEnroe post-match press conference, and he was pissed off because that meant he wouldn't get any sound bites from McEnroe. I managed to run home from RKO and record the report by Dick Schaap, and when Charlie got back from London, I loaned it to him. This was in July 1981. Charlie still hasn't given me the tape back. Every time I see him, he swears he's still looking for it. It's in a box somewhere. But I'm beginning to think he may not be telling me the whole truth about what happened to my video cassette. But my favorite RKO story is about Charlie's sudden and inexplicable obsession with a story during that 1981 baseball strike I mentioned. In the middle of this thing, which stopped the season for 50 days, and was really the beginning of the end of that time when baseball truly mattered in this country. When every day of that strike, somebody on all the TV newscasts said, and the baseball strike is in its 23rd day, a story broke that George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees, was going to meet with baseball commissioner Bowie Kuhn and a couple of other owners who realized that the work stoppage was financial madness. As George told me years later, he was losing about $1 million in revenue every day so that the Milwaukee Brewers could save $5,000 in salaries every year. Well, my boss, Charlie Steiner, decided he was going to scoop the world about this secret Steinbrenner-Kuhn meeting, so he told me to come into the office on one of my off days and work the phones. Work the phones, son. Two of us, me and the newly hired producer, my friend John Martin, were supposed to call everybody we knew and find out for Charlie when these guys were meeting and where and who would be there, and to not go home until we had nailed it down. Well, it was madness. I didn't know anybody in baseball, let alone anybody who knew where the owner of the Yankees was going to meet in secret with the commissioner of baseball, let alone who knew all that and would tell me. But I tried everybody I could think of and had already suggested to John Martin that I was just going to start dialing 10 digits at random and asking whoever answered if they knew. When, after about 8 hours of this, well past my dinner time, I was on the phone with some executive of some West Coast team when he said, "Hold on a minute, I've got another call." And a moment later, from the adjoining room in my office, I heard John Martin say, "Hey, Mr. Smith, hi, this is John Martin from the RKO Radio Network, and, yes, RKO Radio Network. Yes, I'll hold, sir." Mr. Smith picked up my call again and said, "Is this really two of you calling me about this crap at the same time from the same network?" And I said yes, and I apologized, and I told him I was going home. If Charlie doesn't like it, I told John, he can fire me. So, follow me on this. Because I had missed dinner, when I got back to my street on the east side, I was famished. I don't know, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock? The last 2 blocks of my walk home was always identical. I'd come up 3rd Avenue and then hang a right at the southeast corner of 3rd Avenue and 55th Street. I lived at the other end of 55th Street near 2nd Avenue. But now I was going to go pick up some pizza in a very nice place on the northwest corner of this same block. I got the slices, the lights changed, and now I was crossing towards the northeast corner of 55th and 3rd, which itself was the home of a famous New York bar, P.J. Clark's. Ordinarily, I would never have been on that side of the street at that hour, but there I was. And as I slipped past the ancient front door, I saw the side exit open and a burst of bright yellow light, like in an Edward Hopper painting, shoot out onto a limo waiting on 55th Street. And as I walked, carrying my box of pizza and wearing my RKO Radio Network black jacket, who emerges from that light of that side door at P.J. Clark's but George Steinbrenner in a tux? I gasped. I tried to summon the courage to approach Steinbrenner as he walked towards his limo and ask him about his planned meeting with Commissioner Kuhn, and just before I admitted to myself that no, at the age of 22, I did not have such courage, I saw Steinbrenner stop at the limo, and I heard him yell back towards the light shining through the still open side door to Clark's, "Eddie! Eddie!" And with that, Edward Bennett Williams, the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, leaned out, also in a tux, and said with evident exasperation, "What now, George?" Steinbrenner shouted, "What time are you and I and Childs meeting with Bowie tomorrow?" I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my luck. Williams had not seen me. Steinbrenner had not seen me. Williams sighed again. "For the 10th time, George. 9:30. 9:30 in the morning, George. 9:30. Bowie's condo." I now plastered myself against the wall of Clark's. I hoped they had not seen me at all. Without so much as asking the question, I had learned that the Orioles owner and Childs, Eddie Childs, the owner of the Texas Rangers, they would be accompanying Steinbrenner to the meeting, and it would begin at 9:30 at the condominium of Commissioner Bowie Kuhn. And I was wondering if I could try to fake Steinbrenner's voice and shout, "Eddie, where's Bowie's condo again?" When suddenly I heard Steinbrenner say, "Eddie, where's Bowie's condo again?" By now, Edward Bennett Williams had relit a cigar he was holding. "George, write it down this time. 575 Park. 575. I could barely breathe. Good God, they had handed me everything but the cross street. "Eddie! Eddie! What's the cross street?" Williams now swore. "Oh, for F's sake, George, 63rd. 63rd and Park. 575 Park at 9:30 in the morning, okay?" Steinbrenner got into the limo. It squealed off. The door closed. I wrote what I had heard on the top of the pizza box and took off at a dead run to my apartment at the corner of 55th and 2nd, pausing only to take a quick bite of pizza. I called John Martin back at the RKO Radio Network. "I got it." John said, "You got what?" "I got everything about the meeting." John said, "I'll get the boss." Soon, all three of us were on the phone. Charlie did not believe I had gotten him any information, so I laid it on thick. "You writing this down, boss? 9:30 tomorrow morning. It's at Bowie Kuhn's condo at 575 Park. That's the corner of 63rd, of course." Then there was silence at Charlie's end of the phone. "Oh, and Edward Bennett Williams of the Orioles and Eddie Childs of the Rangers, they'll be there too. I don't know, Charlie, if it's just them or there are others, but those four will certainly be there. Bowie's condo, 575. Cross Street is 63rd. Charlie started to make a kind of but noise. But, how did you find out? How in the hell did you actually find out? Why do you think it's true? I had been waiting for this for several moments, and my answer had been rehearsed in my mind at least as far back as my elevator ride up to my apartment. With the most nonchalance I had ever mustered in my life, I answered Charlie Steiner. "Well, Charlie, I ran into Steinbrenner at Clark's." I told George Steinbrenner that story once, and he laughed like hell. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Please share this pod with somebody who doesn't, if you can find somebody who doesn't. Something happened. I guess it's all the good news. More people listening than ever before, up about 25%. Thank you. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel on orchestration and keyboards, Mr. Ray on guitars, bass, and drums. And it was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. It was written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend Dennis Leary, and everything else was pretty much my fault. So that's countdown for this, the 77th day until the 2024 presidential election, and the 1,322nd day since convicted felon Dementia J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing if it happens. Use the mental health system. You have this now, President Biden. Use presidential immunity as assigned by the Supreme Court. Use it all to stop him from doing it again while we still can. And please, anti-Semitic, anti-immigration, gun nut Republicans, please stop shooting at Trump. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Till the next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.